I actually started out on four wheels. Probably age 4. I got a little Yamaha 100. My brother had the same quad. Rode that for a little while. Pretty much transitioned into like a Rupp mini bike. And, you know, I rode the mini bikes and I got I think it's a QA50 Express moped at one point. And that just kind of transitioned into getting my first KX85. I think I was 12 years old when I got my KX85, and so I was a little bit later in the whole scene, but my buddy, his dad owned a really nice mason business in Michigan, and we had every opportunity to build anything we wanted to build, so we had supercross tracks, motocross tracks at our disposal, basically, and I got into racing, rode the 85 beginner class first time. I think I won it by a pretty good margin, and they bumped me out of that class into what used to be the 85 novice class. I rode that for a season, just a little district racing back in Michigan and Ohio, and then went from there to getting into the expert class. Then I got hurt, blew my knee out, getting ready for a big race in that district, and kind of set me back a little bit. Took a little bit of time off on a bike, and I rode CR125 and a KX125 for next few years, and finally ended up getting KX250 4-stroke, which at that time it was like I was going from the 2-stroke to the 4-stroke, and I'm like, I'll never do that, but I kept getting my butt handed to me on the weekends, so I finally had to get on a bike that was competitive. What was I gonna do? I'm not really fast enough on some aspect, and I didn't really have the money to put into it, so then I just went ahead and after high school, made plans, went to MMI, came back, continued to race, but I only made it to like top 5B level, so I wasn't good enough. Every time I tried to get to Loretta's, I got hurt. It was just kind of a sign, do it for fun, get into the mechanics side, and that was it.
When I was younger, growing up in like a small town, was kind of populated. You'd see a dirt bike drive by in the back of a pickup truck, and it was like, oh my God, that's cool, and you'd follow it to the moment you couldn't see it anymore. And every now and then you'd catch it on ESPN. This is back in probably like 97, 98. I was maybe 9, 10 years old. And at that point I'm like, you know what, I gotta get one. I just begged, and I grew up with 2 brothers, and my older one, both of us wanted one so bad. And we just begged and begged, and finally my dad just gave in, and he's like, he took us to the dealership, and we looked at him, and we did everything we could to get it, and he ended up buying us 2 bikes, and I got an XR70, and my older brother got a 100, and I'll never forget that day. Coming home from the dealership, I got my helmet, my gloves, everything. I think I wore the helmet the whole way home. And I think at one point, I just wasn't paying attention, and I crashed right into the house and the garage. And I laid it down, and my visor's all, I was just a mess. And I'm like, I just blew it. My dad's gonna return the bikes. And he's looking at me like, you wrecked my house, you goon. But no, from there he smiled, and I knew it was gonna be all right. So that was the first day we got bikes. I guess after that, if I was gonna race, it was, you had to get a job. So I started working. I actually got a job at the local bike shop, which was kind of cool. I was always there getting oil and doing, the bike work stuff. And they offered me a job to take out the trash and sweep the floors, and I was so in love with motorcycles that, I had to take this job. And so it kind of worked out pretty cool that, the first year I started racing, I was able to get a job at the bike shop, which kind of helped guide the direction I needed to go with keeping the bike maintained, getting parts. And I did that for about 4 or 5 years. And then right after high school, I went to AMI, which was through Wyotech. And that was like a, entry-level college motorcycle school, and similar to MMI. I did that for 6 months down in Florida. And in that time, I was actually, I got hooked up with Jimmy Dakotas, which we grew up in the same town together, which we were kind of buddies from riding, and, he lived down there, and right after school, we were riding a lot more together, and he was fortunate enough his dad kind of was able to allow kids to come and stay at his place and ride. And so I lived with him for a few years, and during that time, in order for me to keep riding, I had to kind of maintain everybody's bikes. So whether it was his dad's, his brother's, his, and I kind of just did all the bike work in exchange for, they'd buy me parts and, keep some, sign me up for races and stuff like that, so the travel.
I went down to Florida, checked out the school there, and that's when I figured out, I was gonna go to school at MMI in 2004, and I had my curriculum all planned out, what I was gonna do, when I was gonna get graduated and all that, and I stuck to it and finished my school and went back home. I always thought it'd be really cool to get onto a race team, or it'd be really cool to start like a mom and pop shop and do your own thing. Those were my answers, and the instructor actually laughed at me and said, "You'll never get on a race team." And at that point, I'm like, wow, this dude's cool. Like, I can't believe he just told a student that. So with that, it kind of fueled the fire a little bit more and gave me a little bit more interest in getting onto a race team. I worked at a Honda dealer as a PDI guy. I made the other techs a lot of money doing the stuff that they didn't want to do. And, I did end up working at a mom and pop shop for a number of years. And I was the only guy there, so I worked on anything from basically a PW 50 to, a CL 175, anything.
It got to the point where riding was, all I wanted to do, but there's a talent level that I just didn't have what it took to get to where these guys are. I did accomplish a few goals. I got a pro license. I attempted a national. I didn't make it, but I was still out there, and I'm proud of myself for that. And after that one attempt, I was like, what am I doing? Am I going to be a professional rider, or should I be a mechanic? And hooking up with Jimmy, I was working with him a little bit, and I actually decided to just give up racing, and I'll be as a mechanic. And we showed up, and we're at Indy in 2010, and it was like, all right, the goal, if we can just get in the night show, that's fair enough goal. He was a great amateur rider, but he didn't have the name like some of the other guys out there, no factory ride. So a night show goal was reasonable, and I remember we qualified 36, so we were both like, all right, well, we did it, and that's cool. And then actually the first heat comes up of the East Coast, and he passed for the lead, and he led it for 4 laps. He ended up getting second in the heat race, and that was like the turning point. Like, from then on, we were like, all right, now everything is, I'm a top 10 guy, let's go. In the main event, he got 20th with the crash in the first turn, but it was still a life-changing moment. Like, we're not here to mess around. Let's take this another level. The following year, going into 2011, Jimmy and I were, he was still running a privateer operation. We were watching Anaheim 1, 2011, and it was, I don't know, maybe, so East Coast time, it was like 9 o'clock at night or something, and he got a call, and it was LaRocco saying, Will Hahn just got hurt. We need a fill-in guy for next week. Jimmy's, freaking out, and I'm like, well, this is great. Like, I mean, it's a little late, but you got to take it. That next morning, we flew out to California, and we were on the track Monday morning with Jimmy on Will Hahn's bike. And so that was kind of how I got introduced to most of the guys here. I worked with Jimmy through 11 and 12 as just a practice mechanic, helping out. The race team, let them do their thing. I'm just here to help wherever I can. And after a couple seasons, it didn't pan out. He had a couple injuries. Actually, at one point during my career, I kind of was unsure if I even wanted to do it. And I'm like, I work so hard, but this doesn't really seem to be, working out the way I want it. I live in a van, I sleep on a couch, or, I'm in a different city. At that time I was very serious with, which is now my wife, and, I missed her, and I wanted to be, home and have a real job. And so at the end of 14, I kind of quit for 6 months, and I went home and worked construction with my father, and I kind of just needed a break to kind of balance out my life and see what I really wanted to do.
It wasn't until 2007 where I got the opportunity to go and work for the Wonder Warthog program. It was pro bono. I paid for everything. I actually drove my now wife's car to most of the stadiums, and I slept outside of the stadium for the weekend, and I paid for everything. So to end up really figuring out, like, this is cool, I want to do it. My first weekend was Indianapolis. The young man that I worked for at that time, I still talk to him. He didn't make the main event, but he gave me an insight of what it's like to be on the floor and everything, and it kind of just sparked, like, this is it. Like, the dealership's cool, but I'm ready for more. In the back of my head, I'm like, man, I got to figure out a way to get to more races and do more and get to talking to more people. And that actually ended up happening in Unadilla that same year. So it was a good bit that I went without actually able to get in contact with anybody, in person. This is literally 2 or 3 months later, and they're like, hey, we met you, he goes, my wife met you, or ex-wife met you at Unadilla. This is Tony Alessi. I'm like, oh, hey, how's it going? He goes, heard you might be interested in a mechanic position. Sure. What do you got? He's like, I'll call you back. I just need to know if you were interested. So I'm like, okay. Well, I went ahead and started doing, go on with my day. And later that night, I was actually moving into my house, my first bought house. So he calls me up and he says, yep, I'm looking for a practice guy. So I'm like, okay, when can you start? And I was like, 2 weeks maybe or whatever. And they said, how about tomorrow? And I'm like, how about tomorrow? I'm like, man, I'm literally putting my boxes in my new house. And I looked at my girlfriend, and my mom is helping me, and I'm like, I have an offer to go to California tomorrow. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah. Explained it to them, and they're like, what are you gonna do? I'm like, I have no idea. But you know what? It's kind of maybe it's a sign to go try it. If it don't work, I come home. So Tony calls me back, and 15 minutes later, and he's like, I bought you a flight. You leave at 7:30 tonight from Detroit. And I'm like, okay. It's 5:30. He's like, well, you better get to the airport. So I literally packed a bag, stopped moving my house, went to the airport, and I started my adventure as their practice guy.
And then at the end of 15, Jeff and Ziggy were approaching Jimmy about, wanting to do a deal again for 16. And, he had to take it at that point, And I was like, well, what am I gonna do? This is my time. If I don't step in, I may never have my shot. And so I remember I went up and I worked on my resume and got it all dialed in, and I drove up to the FC East shop, and that's a few hours for me, but got all the way up there, and I'm thinking I'm gonna meet with Ziggy and sit at his desk and give him the resume, and I get up there and he wasn't even there. And I'm like, all right, well, how about I can just get this to his desk and he can give me a call when he gets it. And he actually called the next day, and I just said, Zig, I'd love to work for you guys. I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but I've been with Jimmy for, about 10 years now. And, I want to keep that relationship with him. I think, if I'm along with the ride, he may be a little bit more comfortable. And, this second time around, I don't think you'll be disappointed in what we can give you. And, not even a month later, I was packing my truck, and I was driving across the country to come here. And I'm here, I got here in December 16, and I did 2 years with Jimmy. We had great results, a few heat race wins, a bunch of top fives. And then at the end of 17, he was moving on to JGR, and I had the opportunity to stay with the team, and I took that, and I actually picked up with RJ Hampshire, and pretty cool moment with him. Our first race together was at WW in the end of 17. They did the USGP, and it was pretty cool day. He actually won both motos, and I had never won any pro event before with a rider, and so for that to happen on our first day together, and the start of it was like, this is gonna be good. And we had 2 good seasons together, and he moved on from there. He went to Husky, and I picked up now with Hunter Lawrence, and Hunter's been great. He's very easy to work with, and he's been plagued with a couple injuries in the off season, which he hasn't been able to race yet, but his determination you can't beat it. I think he could be one of the best, so as long as we get healthy and stay on track, it will be a good season. Working with Jimmy, he's like a little brother. I knew everything about him, so he's, I would say, a little bit picky. He might watch this interview, but he knows that he's a little picky, and working with RJ, he kind of didn't care. If one level was down, that's how he's going to run it. And RJ, he just had a sensitive feel for the bike that, with suspension, it just had to be a little plush. But the 2 different personalities, they're both, they're not high ego guys. They're very cool, laid back. They like to have fun, And so the transition was fairly easy. I feel like I do well with learning other people's personalities and adapting to that. So with RJ, I think it started off on a high note, and we both have a lot of respect for each other. He got that win, and we're like, well, it can't get any worse. I mean, and so it was pretty cool. I couldn't say anything that bad about RJ. He was great to me. We're still good friends, and yeah, he definitely helped on that transition. I was a little nervous. I'd never really worked with many other riders before that, so you know, I didn't want to be the wrong guy for the job. So I did everything I could, but you know, he made that job and transition very easy for me to handle.
At the end of 2012, like I said, there was a few hiccups throughout the way. You know, pretty much Tony was going to take the team over, and you know, Genova was going to go a different direction, and I was already leaning to, you know, move on. I wanted to win. I wanted to get on the podium. I wanted, you know, my best finish was a fourth with Canada, and to know that I was like nipping at the heels as a mechanic with Jake Canada, super talented guy, of, you know, Justin Bogle, who's on the premier Honda 250 team. I'm like, dude, that's where I want to be. I want to be on one of those top tier teams. And in that year, I think it was Steel City, or might have been High Point. I actually had a couple conversations, and it was just, hey, in the future, if you know, looking for a mechanic, let me know. I'd love to come, just at least talk. Like, we'll start there. And then the way it played out with Moto Concepts, it actually seemed like it was just like the time to move on. You know, and I ended up having more conversations with Darren from here, and it wasn't until later to talk to LaRocco, and you know, it's right before Des Nations, so a lot of things are up in the air at Des Nations, so it's always after Des Nations we'll get back with you, or you know, and whatever. And at this time, my time at Moto Concepts was done, so I was free agent, already open to moving on. Ultimately, I really wanted to come here. I had the knowledge of the Hondas, thought that would be a great transition from, you know, instead of going to a new brand. So yeah, it worked out. Getting a phone call at, I think it was about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, you know, and at this time, it's probably a month and a half to 2 months out from Moto Concepts. So like, I was ready to get back to working on bikes. I was ready. I was doing stuff here and there, but to get that phone call that night, I tried to play as cool on the phone as possible, but I'm sure I was like a kid on Christmas Day, you know, like I got off the phone, I looked at my wife, and I'm like, holy crap. I literally got to go in 2 days and sign a contract for GEICO Honda. Like, there's no way. And, you know, I talked to a couple people that I had worked with at the other team. I didn't mention it. I wanted to make sure it was a signed deal. So I was over the top. I knew who I was coming to work with. And, you know, that year going in was Zach Osborne was coming onto the team. So they paired me up with him. They said, you know, we're going to have two. You're going to be new. He's going to be new. I think it's perfect timing. How do you feel about that? I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, the guy just podiumed in LA this year on a Yamaha from Europe. I'm like, I'm absolutely enthused to work for the dude. And I knew him a little bit because Tony knew him and talked to him. And yeah, I couldn't start soon enough.
I had to grind for years, you know, and obviously I had a relationship with Ziggy, and the work that I had to do here in the team, it's, you know, it's more bike than anything else, but you know, you're focusing on, you know, just basic maintenance on the regular bike and keeping that thing fresh. And then when you have a guy that lives in Florida, you got to make sure that they got a bike and every spare part. And so the workload it's cool because we got we only have to focus on just the bike. We're not overseeing the engine as much, or the suspension department, as they got it handled. So, you can focus a lot more on the rest of the bike, and you'll have extra spares, and everything we have is there for you. And that's most important to keeping these guys safe and the bikes running at top notch. I believe that, if anybody that wants to do this job, you have to work, and you got to love what you do. If you don't love it, it's not the ideal 40-hour job, because 40 hours is an easy week. There's a lot of travel time, a lot of late, worse days where you're at a airport and flights are delayed, and that kind of life. There's a lot of aggravation, but if you love going to the races, all that stuff gets ignored, and it's pretty cool if you can enjoy both ends of it, and also keeping a regular life with it. There's a good balance. So
every mechanic knows the parts room, the suspension side of it, engine side is it's there. We know the chassis, we know the semi-truck. So you have an involvement in the most roles other than the team manager. So I feel like, it's just personal opinion, is most people overlook the mechanics and what the value is of them. Happens to be this team, I feel like they actually value the mechanics quite well. So when guys ask, or anybody asks on Saturday, like, did you have the dream job? Like, yes. I go to work doing something that I absolutely love. That's a dream, right? I work on the sickest motorcycles, probably in the world. I have a support group that's unbelievable, that's right in the trenches with you. So it's like, that's top level. But you also have to think, we don't see 4th of Julys. We work Christmas Eve. We don't have New Year's. We don't have a lot of the stuff. Your kids go to their school dances. You don't get to go. You're on a plane usually Wednesdays, and you're building a bike Thursday in a different state. So the sacrifice that's given it's huge. I know my first 9 years, I never even went home. My 10th year, I'm like, I got to go home and see my grandma, see my dad, or whatever the situation, and so there's so much more sacrifice than people actually really even know, but it's a satisfaction on Saturdays when you sit there and, if you're lucky enough, maybe even your family's there to share that moment of popping champagne and holding up the number one or whatever. So that's why we do it.